Because of copyright, I can't show actual footage of these episodes on YouTube. If you want to see this list with actual footage, there's a link to a version of it with footage in the description box. Hey guys, this is Meta527 the second here again. Now some of you are probably wondering why I haven't been doing many reviews lately. That's because I got an idea. Instead of reviewing a bunch of different bad episodes individually, I decided that making a countdown will help me knock out a lot of them at once. And so I can talk about them more publicly since everyone keeps ignoring my reviews and not understanding the words link in description. Anyways, as some have said, even the best cartoons in the world have at least one bad episode sometimes, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this countdown. The top 15 worst episodes of good cartoons. Now, there probably will be at least one episode on this list that you happen to like. And as I've said many times before, I will not force you to agree with my opinion. Just try to hear my reasons as to why I'm putting them on the list. With that said, let's get started. The Super Mario World cartoon may be surprisingly enjoyable, but if there's one problem with it, other than the bad animation, it's that it has 3 episodes that are garbage. 3 episodes may not sound that bad until you realize that the show only ran for 13 episodes. So that means nearly a quarter of the show consists of bad episodes, and they all have one common problem. They all feel like they were made to teach people that technology is a horrible thing and you should never ever use it. The wheel thing says that cars are bad, Party Line says phones are bad, and then there's the worst one, Rock TV, which says that television is bad. In this episode, Bowser is trying to come up with an evil plan, and he thinks of something he learned in the real world, which he was somehow able to get to. This causes Bowser to realize that TV is the most likely thing to rot people's minds, so he decides to create his own Rock TVs and give them to others, but it's all a part of an evil plan. And that's why I think this is worse than the wheel thing and Party Line, because this time, the form of technology was invented by the bad guy, and it says that TV is intentionally used for evil. I'd be okay with these TVs being used for evil if the episode actually said that it was okay to watch TV in moderation. Maybe the writers are only trying to say that technology is not cut out for Dinosaur World, but they could have at least said that instead of making it sound like it's always bad. And even though Bowser's disguises clearly show his face, and he even used his name when selling the TVs, everyone still falls for it. I guess it makes sense why the cave people would fall for it because they're, well, cave people. But what excuse do Mario and Luigi have? So it turns out that Bowser's actually hiding magic Koopas in the TVs and hypnotizing everyone into bringing Mario and Luigi to him. And when they do, Bowser throws them in a ring against 2 dinosaurs. Luckily, Mario and Luigi win with a little help from Yoshi and Peach, and then Yoshi eats everyone's Rock TVs and spits out the magic Koopas inside them. And here's a point that I missed in my review of this episode. When Oogtar gets mad at Yoshi for eating his Rock TV. Even though Oogtar is my least favorite character in the show because of how much of a brat he is, I feel like we're supposed to see this as an example of Oogtar's bratty behavior, but I'd say it's understandable for once. I'd be mad too if something ate my TV. They don't even tell him that it was being used for evil. And then the episode ends with Yoshi eating the giant television set, which causes it to fall on Bowser, and then Yoshi, completely forgetting whose side he's on, tries to free Bowser. Overall, this is a prehistoric mess of an episode. If I can be honest, I kinda enjoyed Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness. It's nice seeing the Kung Fu Panda characters again, the fight scenes are good, and I can think of some genuinely good episodes, such as Bad Po, Fluttering Fingerslip, and The Midnight Stranger. On the other hand, we also have some bad episodes, such as Mouth Off. We start with Po and the Furious Five fighting off some thieves, but Po keeps talking during the battle, which is keeping him from concentrating, and even lets some of the bad guys get away. After that, they go back and talk to Shifu, and he tells Po that talking during the battle distracts him from doing Kung Fu properly. He then tells Po a story about how someone named Wu Shen kept talking too much, and eventually learned to take a vow of silence, and even invented the Silken Moon Touch, which can silence you. Po tries to learn it, but it requires him to take a vow of silence as well, which Po is incapable of doing no matter how hard he tries. Then one night he sneaks into Mantis' room, and decides that a bit of acupuncture will help do the trick. And you know that Mantis knows the Silken Moon Touch. How exactly? And then he finds the right scroll, on his second try, out of all the scrolls he could find. He then uses Mantis' sleeping body to cast a Silken Moon Touch on himself. Now if you've seen these kinds of episodes, you're probably expecting this to backfire somehow. So how does this end up backfiring? You're not going to believe this. Po bumps into Temutai's sons, and because he can't apologize to them properly, Temutai vows to destroy the town. Yeah, I'm not making this up. Now, I understand that it can be frustrating when you don't get apologized to in the way you want to be apologized to, but threatening to destroy the town over it? That is just childish. Actually, no, that's not true. Even children wouldn't sink this low as to destroy the town over not getting their way. Even infants wouldn't try to do this. There are so many better ways they could have had Poe's disabling of his vocal cords be a bad idea, like maybe not responding to Shifu when he wants to be addressed properly, or not being able to tell Shifu something important. So as a result of this, Poe is forced to admit what he had done. So now Mantis is forced to use the Silken Moon Touch on Poe in order to get him to talk again. But it supposedly takes an hour to actually work. What the heck is up with that? And they can't even tell Temutai what the deal was? Does the fate of the town not mean anything? Temutai and his minions then fight against our heroes, and then some of them even try to sneak up on Shifu. So Po tries to warn Shifu about their sneak attack, and this just makes things even more insulting, since this would have been a much more reasonable way for Poe's disabling of his vocal cords to backfire than, "If you don't apologize, we're going to destroy the town." And you know about how they said it would take at least an hour for Po to get his voice back? Yeah, that was a bunch of bogus, since Po gets his voice back in 3 minutes. Po finally apologizes to Temutai, but it's too late, so they attack the Valley of Peace. Once again, this is all over a faulty apology. Po then decides to fight Temutai without speaking, which Temutai finds creepy. He spent most of his shared screen time with you not saying anything. How is this new information? Po defeats Temutai's minions, and eventually they are forced to retreat. Well, it looks like someone beat me to running away from this awful episode. Yeah, this episode isn't good, but it's at least tolerable compared to the episodes you're going to see later on the list. In the past few years or so, Jimmy Neutron has suddenly become a meme. And I can't really say I blame everyone, this is a rather enjoyable show. But of course, it's not perfect. And that's where the episode Carl Wheezer Boy Genius comes in. It starts on an actually pretty funny note, where it looks like they're being attacked by a giant spider, only to reveal that Jimmy's actually looking at a normal spider through a magnifying glass and Sheen's playing dramatic background music. Then Carl comes up and tells Jimmy and Sheen that he has a new girlfriend named Elkie, who supposedly has a lot of cool talents and that she's coming into town. He also tells them that he lied to her that he's a boy genius just like Jimmy, and he doesn't want her to find out the truth about him. So Carl asks to pretend to be a genius for only one day. Jimmy initially doesn't approve of it, but he eventually agrees. And then Carl tells Jimmy that he told Elkie that Jimmy's his dim-witted assistant. Of course, he conveniently forgot to mention that until after Jimmy agreed to it. And yep, this is getting to look like the I'm with stupid of Jimmy Neutron. When Elkie arrives, Carl tries to show her his hover car, but his terrible driving skills almost get them killed. And you're probably noticing that I haven't complained that much about this episode so far. Well, that's because this is where this episode starts to go downhill. Carl scolds Jimmy for putting the wrong fuel in his hover car. Yep, Carl's starting to blame Jimmy for everything and treat him like a real idiot. Like I said, it's I'm with stupid of Jimmy Neutron. Except I might even say it's worse than I'm with stupid. Don't get me wrong, Patrick was just as unlikable in that episode as Carl is in this episode, but at least then it was SpongeBob's idea to pretend to be an idiot, while this time Jimmy doesn't know about it until after he agrees to it. They take Elkie to the lab and show her the inventions. Carl then names them but makes it obvious that he doesn't know what they do. You'd think Elkie would find it suspicious that Carl wouldn't know his own inventions. She asks him to bring back a poet, but he ends up bringing back Attila the Hun, who wreaks havoc on Jimmy's lab. Jimmy did nothing to deserve this, other than getting annoyed with Carl, I guess. Carl then uses brownies to lure Attila back into his own time, and then he once again blames Jimmy for this, and even kicks Jimmy out of his own lab. Some friend you are, Carl. But then he shows Elkie the rocket and takes him to space, but gets caught in a meteor shower, so now it's up to Jimmy to save him. He then brings him back to Earth. They bombard an innocent squirrel on the way, and how does Carl thank Jimmy for saving his life? By blaming Jimmy yet again. Gosh, could you be any more ungrateful? And then this episode does the traditional liar admits the truth scene, but they do it all wrong. They have Elkie admit the truth first. Turns out she lied about all her talents and that she's actually a llama lover. Wanna know why this doesn't work? Because now Carl doesn't have to risk losing it all in order to be truthful. If anything, he's only telling the truth because he knows it'll help get the girl. Episodes that handle this the right way would have the character we're supposed to root for reveal the truth because they realize they're hurting their friends. This episode pretty much just wheezes in the face of that, since Carl doesn't have to learn that friendship comes first. And Carl gets the girl. I guess it is kinda cute seeing them get together, but this would have been so much nicer if Carl had apologized for the way he treated Jimmy. Sorry Carl, but your behavior was uncalled for. No croissants for you! Miniven's Daisy as a test to what kind of friend Daisy is. And by the end of this episode, you're going to be annoyed with Daisy too. You might remember me doing an atrocity scorecard on it a while back on my DeviantArt page, but I gave it way too many atrocity points. Nevertheless, I don't apologize for calling it a bad episode. We start with Minnie making a pie in an actually cool sequence, though I find it kind of surprising that it doesn't take long to cook, but I'll forgive that. We don't want to pad out the episode. It's supposedly one of Minnie's famous apple pies, and she decides to bring it to Daisy's. She tries to call out to Daisy, but Daisy can't hear her. Though to be fair, that's probably understandable, and the fact that it's mostly an accident keeps it from being as bad as another episode you're going to see later down the list. But nothing Minnie does gets Daisy's attention because she's too stubborn to hear it. But we do at least get a fun song number. Daisy then decides to relax on the roof, and Minnie tries stacking up stuff to be able to reach her. But then this episode turns into a mini torture episode when Daisy spills some suntan lotion, causing Minnie to fall, and the stuff that Minnie stacked up also falls over, and of course Daisy doesn't hear all this. She tries climbing the ladder, but Daisy removes the flowers from it, which somehow causes the ladder to collapse, forcing Minnie to once again suffer, and once again, Daisy doesn't hear it. And now Minnie is so mad that she actually attempts to use her car to break into Daisy's house. And look at her face, it's like they're trying to make her look as evil as possible. But I haven't forgotten how annoying Daisy is. Remember when Mr. Enter complained about how he felt that Mrs. Puff's Demolition Doofus performance was being used as an excuse to make SpongeBob look like the good guy? Well, I have that problem in this episode. Albeit to a lesser extent since no one's crippling anyone for life or trying to get anyone killed. But I'm still convinced that the writers seem to think that it's okay to make Daisy as unlikable as possible, just as long as they make her torture victim do something heinous. And then Minnie gets taken away by the cops, which of course Daisy pays no mind to. And then it ends with Minnie calling Daisy and finally giving her the pie by throwing it in her face. Which is actually pretty funny since the episode itself deserves a pie in the face for its performance. I'm sorry if you guys are tired of me talking about Thomas more often recently, but I have to do it again for this entry. Anyways, there are some people who have different ideas of when they thought the show died. Some felt that season 6 or 7 was the last good season. Some say the show died when it transitioned into CGI. Heck, I've met some who even say the show didn't die. Yet, I don't know which one I would agree with since I haven't seen anything past season 11. There are some episodes I could have gone with, like Thomas Comes to Breakfast, for having the perfect opportunity to have Thomas be punished for going without his driver, only for it to not even be his fault and instead the stupid cleaner's fault. Thomas's frosty friend for making Thomas so unbearably stupid and having a big chunk of the episode basically be the same scene repeating itself just with different characters. In the end, I decided on Spotless record. We start with a new tank engine named Arthur arriving, who is here to work with freight cars, and he apparently has a spotless record, meaning that he never once acted up. Thomas and Percy are both impressed by this, and yet for some reason, Thomas concocts an idea to ruin Arthur's record by telling him that Sir Topham Hatt wants him to stop the freight cars from singing. So Arthur tries to do so, but this makes the freight cars mad, so they decide to get back at him by pulling him down a big hill, which causes them to crash into a breakdown, thus ruining Arthur's spotless record. It's already maddening that he had his record tarnished that he had kept for a long time up until now, but when it's something that wasn't even his fault, this makes me absolutely furious to think we're not even in the top 10 yet. Thomas then comes by and admits to his wrongdoings. Even though this went exactly the way he wanted it to play out, he suddenly feels bad about it. At least Thomas regretted what he did, which keeps him from being too unlikable, but the damage to Arthur's record has been done, and it cannot be undone at all. Do you want to know why that character's perfect record was ruined and plot was handled much better and Gordon takes a dip? Because then, Gordon's accident happened as a result of his own arrogance, not because he was tricked by someone else. Thomas and Harvey clear away the mess, and Thomas apologizes for what he did, only to follow it up by saying that maybe spotless records are made to be broken. Stupid lesson aside, that line would have worked much better if it was Arthur who said that line. Because when Thomas says it, that's like telling someone who went blind because of something you did intentionally that eyes are meant to be permanently damaged. Oh, but it's okay because they both decide that spotless records can be mended again, except for the fact that they can't. If you act up once, game over. You can no longer say you've never once messed up in your life. Now whenever I see Arthur, I can't help but cringe because of how it reminds me of how mean-spirited this episode was towards him after leaving a permanent mark on his record and proclaiming that it can be fixed, even though, once again, it can't. Overall, this episode stinks, and it bothers me even more in the UK version since Michelangelo's narration honestly kinda gives me a headache. This is just an utter train wreck of an episode. Zazu's off day off from the Timon and Pumbaa show. We're at the title card and already I have a big problem. The title is almost exactly the same as an earlier episode, Zazu's off by 1 day, making it very easy to get the two mixed up. I know that some shows like SpongeBob and Pokemon also have to use title puns at times, but at least they had an excuse. They've gone on for several seasons, and the episodes were years apart instead of being 1 month apart. And their titles were this similar. In this episode, Zazu is trying to enjoy his 1 day off all year, but every once in a while, Gopher comes up and interrupts him to get to work. This goes on for much longer than needed before the actual conflict starts. Literally 2.5 minutes. Then again, I guess I shouldn't be complaining, since the remaining 3/4 of this episode are much, much worse. Zazu finally agrees to get to work when he learns that the water hole has dried up. Great, 1 day off in 365 days and he can't even enjoy it. He eventually finds the source of the problem, that's being blocked by a stupid elephant named Jumbo Jumbo. Even when Zazu tells him that he's blocking the river and that he's drying up the water hole, Jumbo Jumbo doesn't even care. I get that we're supposed to hate this guy, but still insufferable having to put up with him. And for the remainder of this episode, we have Zazu trying to move this insult to elephants, but with no avail. And that's where my other 2 biggest problems come into play. It's a Zazu torture episode. And it's one of those episodes that consists of the protagonist repeatedly trying to do something but failing each time in a comedic fashion. Why don't I like these? Because they feel like an excuse to completely halt the plot, they feel like the same thing every time, they're extremely unsatisfying to watch our hero fail over and over again, and if you're paying enough attention to the length, it should be obvious which attempts aren't going to work. Yeah, that means I'm not a fan of those Mario's Calamity videos either. But eventually it's revealed that the reason Jumbo Jumbo is here is because it's his day off. So Zazu gets Gopher to bring a sheet of paper that shows that it's actually Zazu's day off. This gave me some hope for the episode, that maybe Zazu made a mistake and that it wasn't his day off, meaning that his real day off was not spent moving a stupid elephant. But nope, turns out Zazu was right, and he has to wait another whole year before he finally gets to have the whole day off. Well, at least it's enough to finally get Jumbo Jumbo to leave, even though the contract he signed wasn't enough to get him to move earlier. Yet this will? But whatever, at least he's out of the way, but he gets no comeuppance for causing everyone to nearly die of thirst. And then Zazu learns that tomorrow is Jumbo Jumbo's real day off, so he has to spend what few hours he has left of his day off having to dread doing this all over again. I sure wouldn't want to spend a day off watching this episode. Roomies from Penguins of Madagascar. This episode is just beyond obnoxious and mean-spirited, and I can safely say it deserves a spot on the list. The premise is that Marlene has a new roommate and she is really excited about this. She eventually meets her roommate who quite literally drops in on her and mistakes her for a rat and tries to kill her. This can only end so well. The new roommate, a walrus named Rhonda, realizes that Marlene is actually not a rat, but she still starts behaving rudely towards her and does stuff like burping in her face. And we also get to hear Rhonda ruining the ballgame song and not even singing it right. Get used to that. Then she takes Marlene's hairbrush and uses it to brush her armpits with it. And then she rudely tells Marlene to clean it before she gives it back to Rhonda, even though it's Marlene's hairbrush. As Mr. Enter once said, arrogance and stupidity are the 2 worst traits to have together. And the fact that Rhonda is actually stealing Marlene's hairbrush and acting like it belongs to her just makes me want to punch Rhonda in the face. And I usually like walruses. Then we get a joke that's way too overused in comedy where a character is about to sneeze on someone, but then they realize they don't actually have to sneeze, but then when the other character lets their guard down, they sneeze on said character. That joke's like 50 years old, and Rhonda even laughs at Marlene after sneezing on her. That just reeks of malice. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, this is a Marlene torture episode. And a really disgusting one at that. Not helped by how there are times where Marlene sounds like she's in very real pain. And what's worse, Rhonda even stunk up Marlene's room, thus forcing Marlene to suffer even more. Who throws a walrus and otter in the same habitat anyway? Oh right, this place is run by Alice the zookeeper, or as I like to call her, the zoo plot device. As I was saying, Rhonda continues to be obnoxious and she even blows her nose on Marlene. Seriously, what were these writers on when they wrote this? Marlene is now as fed up with Rhonda as we are, and she orders the penguins to get rid of her. And even brings up how Rhonda used her as a tissue, which the penguins are disgusted by. Just because you admit something's disgusting doesn't make it any less disgusting. Our heroes then send Rhonda away, but just when it looks like Marlene can finally relax, Private comes up and tells her that the crate they sent Rhonda in is going to a polar bear reserve and that Rhonda's in danger of being eaten. So now the episode wants us to think that Marlene is the bad guy here. I mean, to be fair, if I were in Marlene's position, I'd probably feel guilty too. But this honestly feels like it was thrown in for the sake of making Marlene look like the bad guy of the 2. It's just like the Demolition Doofus comparison I made back in Mini Visits Daisy, except this is much closer to Demolition Doofus Extreme. At least with Daisy, it seemed like what she did was mostly an accident. And I might even say Rhonda's performance is worse than SpongeBob's performance in Demolition Doofus. At least SpongeBob tried to prevent the accident that crippled Mrs. Puff, and he at least tried to make her feel better. Granted, he did a terrible job at it, but at least he tried. Back to this episode. They find the crate, bring it back to the zoo, and decide to have Rhonda be sent to the Hoboken Aquarium instead. Well, at least Rhonda redeems herself later in the Hoboken surprise, and the episode's at least good for one thing. It made me realize that maybe I should never ever have a roommate. Otherwise, I'd probably end up with someone as terrible as Rhonda. Everyone Knows It's Bendy is an episode that everyone knows why it's so bad. It starts with a family dropping off an imaginary friend named Bendy at Foster's because of how terrible he's been, but Harriman and Frankie proclaim that Bendy probably wasn't responsible and was actually blamed by the kid, because apparently this is something that a lot of kids do. Then we cut to Wilt, Eduardo, Coco, and Blue playing video games, till Bendy comes in and knocks a flower pot off the TV for no good reason. When Harriman and Frankie come in, our heroes try to tell them what happened, but Bendy convinces them that he's being framed again, and Frankie and Harriman blame our heroes without any proper evidence that they're lying. And then our heroes are forced to clean up after Bendy's mess. Bendy then continues to go around and do bad things and blame everyone else for his actions, and it is just plain unsatisfying. And Bendy keeps making himself look innocent, which just ends up getting jarring. And don't Frankie and Harriman find it suspicious that Bendy's always nearby when this stuff happens? Bendy also writes Blue's name on the wall, and then Blue angrily grabs the marker because he's an idiot. And of course, everyone gets punished. They try to get proof of Bendy causing trouble, but Bendy gets away before they want to get proof. And then Blue grabs the bat because once again, he's an idiot. Bendy then pretends to be Harriman and says embarrassing things about Harriman, so Blue tries to run over there and get more proof. But of course, Frankie and Harriman just take sides and assume that Blue is a liar. This is one thing I hate in media, where the ones in charge are completely one-sided and never believe our heroes, and always trust the bad guys. But then Blue gets an idea to set up an elaborate trap that leads to Bendy trying to do bad things, but leaving behind way too much evidence and flooding the house in the process. So it seems like Bendy is finally going to get caught. But because Blue is still a moron, he tells him all about how he framed Bendy for this, and he once again gets in trouble, while Bendy gets off scot-free. Well, at least it was satisfying watching him get blasted by the water during the flood, but not satisfying enough. When I first saw this episode as a preteen, I literally shouted, "I cursed that new kid!" after the episode. Granted, I was a stupid kid back then, but that was probably one of my more justified reactions. This episode is just so heinous that even the episode's writers regretted it and even kicked Bendy off the show. But in terms of the show, what did happen to Bendy? I guess we can probably assume that eventually Harriman and Frankie caught on to Bendy's misbehavior and kicked him out. Maybe he did get his comeuppance after all. Either that or he was adopted. But because I want to be more satisfied, I'm choosing the former. Especially since who would ever adopt this guy? Back when I reviewed Too Tall Tales, I stated that I was considering calling So Long Sucker even worse than that episode. And wouldn't you know, this episode is worse than Too Tall Tales. Our episode begins with an interdimensional window opening up and letting out a small creature. It follows Sonic back with them and seems to take a liking to Tails. Tails then names him Goopster and he eats all the chili dogs, and we get the overused joke where a character tries to eat what little food is left only for Goopster to eat it first. Scratch and Grounder try to stop by and capture Sonic, but Sonic manages to use a bubblegum slingshot to destroy Grounder's plane. Sonic gets his foot caught between some rocks, but then Goopster grows in size and consumes Scratch's plane in a very horrific manner. But Goopster is still hungry and then starts to consume everything around him. Yeah, guys, you want us to care for this thing, right? And we're supposed to see this thing as cute? I don't see anything that could be seen as cute about this monster, aside from occasionally making that little puppy face. Even in Too Tall Tales, Tails only ate one thing that wasn't food, and at least he tried to leave town to prevent causing further destruction, and at least he didn't look like a demonic spawn of Satan when doing so, but Sonic managed to get it to stop by using more chili dogs, which he was saving for his retirement. Those would have gone bad decades before your retirement. Sonic tells Tails that they can't keep Goopster because of how dangerous he is, and I feel like the writers want us to believe that Sonic is in the wrong for wanting to be rid of the horrific abomination that could consume them at any moment. Even if Goopster didn't mean it, he could still very easily consume them by accident. Even their attempts at making us feel bad for him feel kind of manipulative, since I don't think he really deserves our sympathy. I mean, sure, he just saved them from Scratch and Grounder, but soon after, he tried to consume the very same ones he just saved. They eventually do agree that he should be sent back to his own dimension, but then Scratch and Grounder arrive and lure him into a truck and drive off with him back to Robotnik's lair. But when Goopster runs out of chili dogs, he starts crying. Robotnik tells him to shut up, and then Goopster once again becomes the disgusting monster that we've come to know him as, and starts eating everything, in a scene that, once again, is way too unsettling. But this causes Robotnik to decide that Goopster could be of use to him. Sonic and Tails show up to save the little brat, but then the bad guys get Goopster to eat Sonic and Tails. But then he conveniently happens to have a stomachache, so he burps them back up, and then Sonic and Tails free Goopster. Sonic cuts down a tree to use as a bridge to get away, and then cuts the tree bridge to keep Robotnik from crossing it. And let's be real, the only reason that worked was because Robotnik's Eggomatic doesn't fly like it normally does. Then it starts to storm, and the portal reopens so Goopster can get back to his world. And I'd be more sad at the scene if they give us more to like about Goopster. Seriously, I know that sometimes we like to joke about Kirby being a heartless monster that eats everything in sight, but he's nowhere near as much of a glutton as this guy. And they don't make Kirby's inhaling too scary. Okay, at least not normally. Goopster, on the other hand, is probably the worst pet ever, and that's saying a lot considering one of our previous experiences on this channel. This just makes me wonder what drugs these writers were on. It's a Wishful Life from the Fairly Odd Parents. Everyone should know how infamous this episode is by now, and if not, then, well, let me explain. Timmy is trying to get some appreciation by doing good deeds for people, but it doesn't go very well for him. Why? Because Mr. Bickles complains about the new artwork by making such minuscule complaints that he makes Game Dude look like a good critic. AJ rudely turns down Timmy's gift, which is a computer that's apparently outdated, and not even thinking of how much money Timmy must have spent on that, and Timmy's dad is upset because Timmy just ruined his chances of winning the worst lawn competition, which apparently happens to be going on at this very moment. Well, at least he didn't act like a spoiled brat like Bickles and AJ did. Timmy then decides to wish himself out of existence so that he can see how much worse everyone is without him. But then he learns from Jurgen von Strangle that everyone's lives are actually better off without him. Why would you go to such a cruel length like that? Then again, this show's done stuff like this before for the sake of its morals. Like in Most Wanted Wish, which says you can't get everyone to like you, but does this by saying no one ever pays attention to Timmy, even compared to a rock. Or Mr. Right, which says you can't always be right, and says this by saying Timmy's literally always wrong. And this is actually the worst of those. When Timmy is told that literally everyone is better off without him. Not only is that horribly mean-spirited, but most of the reasons Timmy's lack of existence improves the world sound like the writers just pulled those reasons out of their rear ends. Francis would still have plenty of other kids he could have bullied. Chester can't use Cosmo and Wanda's magic to wish for shiny teeth, since it was previously established that only the Tooth Fairy can grant tooth-related wishes. Which, to be fair, was actually pretty dumb, like the no wishing for breakfast after 11 rule. As for Cracker, Timmy wasn't the one who ruined Cracker's childhood. It was Cosmo. And why would Dr. Bender want to prevent pain if the show's already told us that he loves inflicting pain on others? And what about the ball hogs? If Timmy didn't teach them to work as a team, they would have been forced to freeze to death at the Alaskan League. But eventually, Timmy is able to distract Jorgen with laughing gas and tries to use Jorgen's wand to wish himself back into existence, but then realizes that would make everyone miserable again, so he decides not to. Then Jorgen reveals that he was actually testing Timmy. And he tells Timmy that you don't do good deeds to get you noticed, but because they're the right thing to do. That is the only reason this episode isn't any higher. Because that is actually a really good moral, and it's one you don't hear very often. I'm actually kind of bothered by it, because it makes me question if I'm even allowed to hate this episode. But I still do. So as a reward for passing the test, Jorgen agrees to grant Timmy one wish, and he uses it to wish himself back into existence. Even though that goes against how he didn't want to do so a minute ago. But yeah, this episode is just plain awful. And I bet we all would wish this episode out of existence if we could. Happy New Year, Charlie Brown. I think I've pretty much covered everything that makes this episode so awful when I did my review of it. So the premise is that Charlie Brown has to do a book report on the book War and Peace. And he has to spend the whole winter break doing this. What kind of sadistic monster of a teacher assigns little kids a book that long anyways? That has got to be the worst teacher in the world. Not helped by how even though Charlie Brown and Linus take the same class, we never have to hear about Linus doing it. So throughout the episode, we have to watch Charlie Brown suffer as he is forced to spend nearly all of his spare time reading this book that's as boring to us as it is to him. And to make it even worse, there are even times where they play slave labor music. That basically says, we know you don't want to watch this, but we're still going to make both you and Charlie Brown suffer. Does his suffering at least pay off in the end? Heck no. In the end, he gets a D- on his assignment. Yeah, you know those overdramatic sounding lines Charlie Brown said in this episode? Like saying he just had his whole vacation ruined, and when he says that he can't do anything over the holidays. Well, judging by the grade he got in spite of spending nearly every waking hour trying to get his homework done, in those two lines, it turns out he wasn't being overdramatic in saying those, and that he was right in making those assumptions. If anything, it's saying he should have taken even less time off and spent literally every second he could have spent on reading the book. Probably even including sleeping hours. This psychopath of a teacher is just horrible, and should be thrown in jail instantly for being this horrible to children. Not to mention, it basically teaches kids that we're never allowed to have any breaks from our homework. That is a really, really bad lesson to teach kids. This episode deserves to be blown up by New Year's Day fireworks, because it never should have seen the light of day. The Cavern from Pokemon Generations. Now, some of you who know me well enough will probably know that Kyogre is my favorite Pokemon, so you'd think that would make me love this episode. But instead, it ends up making me hate it even more. It actually starts on a pretty faithful recreation of the Kyogre revival scene in Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. Archie and his minions are in the Cave of Origin when they find the sleeping Pokemon Kyogre in hopes of using it to expand the seas, until Shelly comes in and scolds Archie for doing it, and says can't he see that the world that he wants to create and the world that Kyogre will make are two completely different places. Can't you see that you are also partially responsible for helping Archie get closer to this? I know you didn't realize how much the team had underestimated Kyogre's power back then, but like I said when I did my everything wrong with video on the games, Shelly should be admitting she was also partially responsible for this. And it's even worse here because at least in the game we saw Shelly do some evil things. This, on the other hand, plays her off like a complete saint. Not even a flawed hero, a complete saint. Yeah, I think I much preferred Shelly's anime counterpart. Seriously, even B-Movie got this right by having Vanessa admit that she was partially responsible for when all the flowers started dying. So Shelly tries to inform Archie that Kyogre will flood the world, but Archie believes he has it under control, and so he awakens Kyogre. And then tells Kyogre to destroy everything. You didn't want everything destroyed, you just wanted it changed. You're as confused on your goals as the grunts in the post-game. So Kyogre emerges and puts pretty much everything Shelly said into effect, causing massive storms everywhere in an actually pretty awesome scene. Archie eventually learns from Matt that Primal Kyogre is destroying everything, thus causing Archie to realize his mistake. And Shelly still doesn't admit that she also had a hand in this. They run outside and see what's happening, and then the episode ends with Kyogre about to kill them. What happens next? I guess we're supposed to assume that things played out like they did in the games where the player caught Kyogre, saved the world, and that Archie and Shelly were still alive in the end. But from that last shot, it looks like there's literally no way of Archie and Shelly getting out of there alive unless some ex machina appears out of nowhere. It makes it look like the episode might as well have had them consumed by Kyogre, and that just makes me so mad. Even though I only have two big problems with this episode, it's a 5-minute episode, so that's a much bigger fraction of it than you'd think. This episode genuinely hurts me as a Kyogre fan, and as someone who had Pokemon Sapphire as my favorite game when I was a kid. Okay, maybe I'm cheating a little by putting two Pokemon episodes on here, let alone right next to each other, but Pokemon Generations and the main Pokemon anime are two completely different shows, so I'd say it's okay. And plus I also wanted an excuse to rant on the Cavern episode while still complaining about this one. I'd go more into depth on why I hate this episode so much, but I have plans of complaining about it in a future countdown or two, so I'll just list off the problems that stick out to me. One problem is that it started the infuriating trend of Team Rocket tricking our heroes with their paper-thin disguises, and our heroes being stupid enough to fall for them. I mean, one could argue that they also disguised themselves in the previous episode, but they actually weren't using those for evil, and Misty knew it was them, so I'd say that doesn't count. Here, however, they fall for it. There's also when Ash agrees to trade his Butterfree for Eradicate, and took Brock's word on it when he obviously wasn't thinking clearly at the time. Well, at least he later realizes his mistake and trades back. And then we get my biggest problem. When Team Rocket steals everyone's Pokemon. It is kinda cool seeing them fight back with the Pokemon gathering together, but that doesn't make up for how the trainers don't even try to get their stolen Pokemon back. They only stopped Team Rocket from stealing the Pokemon they had left. If they had just shown everyone getting their Pokemon back, I personally would have loved to see this. Considering how, like I said, the battle scene is actually pretty awesome. These trainers had such good relationships with their Pokemon. Their Pokemon were really good friends with them, and now they can never see them again. This is so upsetting that when I was younger, I almost felt like I was gonna throw up. And there's one more problem, which is one that I admittedly have a bigger problem with the censors than the writers. How it's apparently okay to do something that makes it look like you're referencing the sinking of the Titanic, one of the worst tragedies in history, yet if you do so much as having characters slap someone, that's a horrible thing that needs to be cut out. Either way, the fact that the ship sinks at the end sounds like a perfect metaphor for this episode, even if everyone did survive it. There's a lot of gray area for what bad SpongeBob episodes qualify for the list, since even though there are a lot of bad SpongeBob episodes, most of them are from the show's Dark Age, and that includes SpongeBob You're Fired, which I previously stated is what I think is the worst episode of the show. So instead, I'm going with the episode that I believe is the second worst, The String. This episode may be from the Redemption era, but it somehow manages to be even worse than the Power for Gary and One Course Meal, if not because of the ending. So SpongeBob finds a loose thread on the back of Squidward's shirt, then begs to pull it off and says it in a way that's more annoying than he's ever been. But the thread doesn't seem to end, and it ends up destroying everything. And during it, we get a moment I was way too nice to last year, for it's probably the biggest middle finger to constructive criticism in the entire show. When Mr. Krabs has a $10 million bill, which is his most valuable possession, except for one that looks like it's going to be Pearl, only to reveal, nope, Pearl's picture was just where Mr. Krabs keeps his real most valuable possession, a $100 million bill. You see that? It looks like the writers know we want Mr. Krabs to love Pearl again, and they're basically saying F you for that. That is one of the worst possible things you could do when writing media. Even to the people who defend this episode, I'd be genuinely amazed if you could actually find a way to defend that. Back to the main problem, SpongeBob continues to use the string to torment everyone, and it eventually ends on the worst ending to the show, where he destroys the entire universe. Now, when I complained about that, a lot of people called me out by saying the ending isn't canon. And let me just say, I know the ending's not canon. I know the show doesn't really follow a continuity. Heck, I've known this years before this episode was even in development. But that doesn't keep this ending from being infuriating. It's still insulting watching our childhood hero destroy the universe and kill everyone. And think about the kids watching. They'd probably want nothing to do with SpongeBob anymore after watching this. I can just imagine children reenacting a certain Patrick scene from the Sponge Who Can Fly, all because of this horrible episode. I just wish that I could use this string to destroy this episode, because it makes Ink Lemonade look like a masterpiece compared to this. Before we get to number 1, here are some honorable mentions. Dexter vs. Santa's Claus from Dexter's Lab. I don't care if it's supposed to be a satire. Dexter is unlikable, and it ends on the most unsatisfying note I've ever seen to a Christmas special. The only reason it wasn't on here was because I haven't seen enough Dexter's Lab episodes to know if it's a bad episode of a good cartoon. Donald's lab trade from House of Mouse. Cool idea of Donald being tricked by Jafar, ruined by the insulting twist that, oh, he didn't want the magic lamp, he was actually looking for a cool lamp with a clock gizmo. And it ends with Mickey intentionally putting his friend in danger of being eaten. And I thought the way he punished him in PhilharMagic was harsh. One false movie from Foster's Home. When it comes back from the commercial break, it suddenly shows this weird kiddie show that they show for way too long, leaving the audience confused before revealing that it was actually Eduardo watching it. Speaking of Eduardo, he's unlikable because his stupidity cost Mac the competition, 2 feet high and rising. This episode is what we have to blame for Mort's weird foot fetish in the show that I don't remember him ever having in the movies. Fright Night from Danny Phantom. It seemed like we were finally going to watch Danny beat Dash for once, until his stupid parents ruined it and got him disqualified. Blue Cat Blues from Tom and Jerry. I could have easily gone with one of the episodes where Jerry is trying to get Tom into trouble, because I usually like to root for Jerry and don't want Jerry making himself look like a brat. But this episode is actually worse than any of these. We start with Tom sitting on railroad tracks trying to get run over by a train. Oh no, they're going one-course meal on us. Actually, this episode is even worse than one-course meal, for reasons I'll explain. For starters, this face makes Plankton's depressed condition look like a pleasing image for kids. It then flashes back to earlier when Tom and Jerry were enjoying their day, until Tom's girlfriend comes by. They seem to have a very good time together until Tom's rival, Butch, steals her away. Tom tries everything he can to get her back, only to find out that she has fallen for Butch, spending everything he has on stuff to impress her, but none of that works, causing Tom to get depressed, eventually leading to what's happening in this episode. Jerry is saddened by this, but at least he still has his girlfriend, at least until he finds out that his girlfriend dumped him for another mouse, which causes Jerry to sit on the railroad tracks and wait to get run over as well. All because he lost his girlfriend. And then this episode literally ends right there. Even in One Course Meal, SpongeBob was eventually able to talk Plankton out of committing suicide, but this episode doesn't do that. It ends with them both committing suicide by being run over by a train. At least in One Course Meal, Plankton's reasoning for attempting suicide was because he thought he was being tormented for 16 days by a creature that could eat him at any moment. I know that losing a girlfriend is also a source of depression, but this one basically tells people, if you're going through depression, it won't get any better for you. Forget all that time heals all wounds stuff, just kill yourself and it'll all be over, because there's no use trying to move on. Okay, maybe I'm looking too deep into this, especially since I once made a really stupid claim that Skyward Sword teaches people to commit suicide because it'll let you summon a bird that'll let you fly. But this is more believable than that. And what's also terrible is that this is actually how the original Tom and Jerry series ended. So it genuinely feels like my childhood has been destroyed. Who thought it would be okay to actually have a series end with 2 childhood icons killing themselves over the loss of their girlfriends? I can handle sad moments, but this is just horrible. Slaughtering one of our favorite childhood shows like this, and leaving a really bad taste in their mouths while doing this, and being more likely to do something that might actually cause harm in the real world, makes this what I think is the #1 worst episode of a good cartoon.